Now pay close attention, because what you are about to hear is not just a simple message. It is something that has remained hidden within another person's psyche for a long time. There are certain truths the conscious mind chooses not to accept, not because they are false, but because they feel too intense, too revealing, and too real. As a result, these truths are pushed deep into the unconscious, where they continue to develop, influence, and shape behavior in ways that are not fully understood. The person you have in mind has been going through an ongoing inner conflict. On the surface, their actions may have appeared distant, uncertain, or even inconsistent. However, beneath that surface, there has always been a different narrative unfolding. It is a story they felt too afraid to express, too unsure to act on, and too overwhelmed to face. You need to understand that the human psyche often protects itself by avoiding what it fears the most, even when that very thing is also what it deeply desires. They have always wanted to remain with you. This is not something they realized only recently. It is something that has existed quietly and persistently, like a voice echoing deep within their soul. But fear, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of rejection, and the fear of losing control stood in the way. So instead of moving closer, they hesitated. Instead of speaking their truth, they chose silence. Not because they did not feel, but because they felt too deeply. In the language of the unconscious, avoidance does not mean absence. It is often a sign of something far more powerful. When a person distances themselves from a connection, it is not always because they want to escape it, but because they do not yet have the strength to face what it requires of them. And what you represented to this person was not something ordinary. You were a mirror, reflecting back parts of themselves they had long ignored or denied. This is where the inner conflict began. Being with you meant confronting themselves. Acknowledging their emotions meant breaking down the walls they had carefully built over time. And for many, this becomes the most difficult journey of all. It is often easier to walk away from someone than to face the truths they bring to the surface within us. But time has a way of revealing what the mind tries to hide. The longer something is suppressed, the stronger it becomes. What once began as a quiet feeling has now developed into something undeniable. They can no longer ignore it, and they can no longer pretend it is not there. And so, they arrive at this point, the moment of truth. Understand this clearly. This is not only about you. It goes beyond that. It is about their awakening, their realization that what they felt was real, that what they avoided truly mattered, and that what they lost was not something easily replaced. Regret is a powerful force. It pushes a person to look back, to reflect, and to question their own decisions. In doing so, it gradually brings clarity. They have come to recognize that their silence was not strength, but fear. Their distance was not indifference, but confusion. And their absence was not a lack of feeling, but an inability to express it. Now, they find themselves at the edge of their own truth, perhaps ready for the first time to fully face it. But there is something you must also understand. When truth finally comes to light, it does not undo the past. It does not remove the moments of absence, the confusion, or the pain. It simply reveals what was always there. The question is no longer about what they feel. That part is now clear. The real question is whether both of you are prepared to face what comes next. Because accepting this truth means stepping into something deeper, something more demanding. It requires awareness, courage, and a willingness to confront not only each other, but also yourselves. The connection you shared was never superficial. It was grounded in something far more meaningful, something that reaches the core of the human experience. So now, as this truth begins to surface, you must not only listen to their words, but also pay attention to your own inner voice. The unconscious communicates with both of you, guiding, warning, and revealing. And in that quiet space within yourself, you will discover the answer to what this truth truly means for you. Hidden emotions and suppressed truths have a unique way of shaping human behavior, often without conscious awareness. What remains unspoken does not simply disappear. Instead, it settles deep within the psyche, influencing thoughts, decisions, and reactions in subtle yet powerful ways. When a person consistently avoids expressing what they truly feel, it is rarely because those emotions are weak or unimportant. On the contrary, it is often because those feelings are too intense, too overwhelming to face directly. The mind, in its effort to protect itself, pushes these emotions beneath layers of distraction, denial, and rationalization. Yet, no matter how deeply something is buried, it does not disappear. It continues to exist, quietly waiting for the moment it can rise to the surface. In many situations, individuals are not fully aware of the depth of their own emotions. They may sense that something remains unresolved, something still lingering, but they are unable to clearly define it. This creates inner tension, a silent conflict between what is felt and what is consciously acknowledged. Over time, this tension begins to show itself in indirect ways: hesitation, inconsistency, emotional distance, or even sudden withdrawal. To an outside observer, these behaviors may seem confusing or contradictory. However, they are often the outward expression of an internal struggle that has not yet been resolved. Suppressed truth carries weight. It demands attention, even when it is ignored. The longer it is held back, the more pressure it builds within the unconscious. This pressure does not simply disappear. It continues to grow, shaping perception and influencing how a person engages with the world around them. They may feel drawn to certain people or situations without fully understanding the reason. Or they may repeatedly avoid circumstances that trigger the emotions they are trying to suppress. In this way, the hidden truth continues to guide them, even as they attempt to escape it. Eventually, there comes a point when the mind can no longer maintain the illusion of control. The barriers that once kept these emotions contained begin to weaken, and the truth starts to surface, sometimes gradually and sometimes all at once. This moment can feel unsettling, even overwhelming, because it forces the individual to confront something they have long avoided. Yet it is also a moment of clarity. What was once hidden becomes visible, and what once felt confusing begins to make sense. This emergence of truth is not accidental. It is part of a deeper psychological process, a movement toward wholeness and self-awareness. The unconscious is not simply a place where thoughts are buried. It is an active force that seeks integration. It pushes the individual toward recognizing and accepting all aspects of themselves, even those they find difficult or uncomfortable. When hidden emotions finally come to light, they bring with them the opportunity for understanding, growth, and transformation. However, recognizing the truth is only the first step. What comes next requires courage, the courage to accept what is felt without retreating into denial. It requires honesty, not only with others, but with oneself. And perhaps most importantly, it calls for a willingness to release the fear that kept these emotions hidden in the first place. Because in the end, what is suppressed does not define a person. It is how they choose to face it that truly shapes who they become. The inner conflict between fear and love is one of the most powerful struggles within the human psyche, often unfolding quietly beneath conscious awareness. A person may feel a deep emotional connection, something real and undeniable, yet at the same time experience an equally strong urge to withdraw. This contradiction is not a sign of insincerity, but rather evidence of two opposing forces working within the mind. Love draws them closer, encouraging vulnerability, openness, and emotional exposure. Fear, in contrast, pulls them away, warning of possible pain, rejection, or loss of control. These forces do not cancel each other out. Instead, they exist together, creating a tension that can feel both confusing and paralyzing. When fear becomes dominant, it often hides in subtle forms. It may appear as doubt, hesitation, or the need for distance. A person may convince themselves that they are uncertain, that the connection is not right, or that the timing is wrong. But beneath these explanations lies a deeper truth. They are afraid of what the connection demands. To truly love someone is to risk being fully seen, without defenses or masks. It requires a level of emotional honesty that many are not ready for, especially if they have been hurt before or have learned to protect themselves by keeping their feelings hidden. At the same time, love does not disappear simply because it is resisted. It remains present, quietly influencing thoughts and emotions in persistent ways. A person may try to move forward, to distract themselves, or to suppress what they feel, but the connection continues to return. It may appear in memories, in moments of longing, or in an unexplainable sense that something important remains unresolved. This is because genuine emotional bonds are not easily dismissed. They are rooted in deeper layers of the psyche that do not respond to surface-level decisions. The conflict between fear and love often results in inconsistent behavior. At one moment, the person may appear drawn in, attentive, and emotionally present. In the next, they may become distant, withdrawn, or uncertain. This inconsistency is not a form of intentional manipulation, but rather the outward expression of an internal struggle that has not yet been resolved. They are caught between the desire to move closer and the instinct to protect themselves. And until one force becomes stronger than the other, this pattern tends to repeat over time. However, the tension created by this conflict eventually begins to demand resolution. It becomes increasingly difficult to remain in a state of indecision. The individual may start to realize that their fear is not truly protecting them, but instead preventing them from experiencing something meaningful. They may begin to question their own behavior, reflect on missed opportunities, and consider what could happen if they allowed themselves to fully embrace what they feel. This moment of awareness is important because it represents a shift from avoidance toward direct confrontation. Instead of running from their emotions, they start facing them more directly. They begin to understand that fear, although powerful, is often rooted in past experiences rather than present reality. As this understanding deepens, love is given more space to exist without being overshadowed. The struggle between fear and love does not resolve immediately, but awareness changes its nature. What was once unconscious becomes conscious, and with that comes the possibility of choice. The person is no longer completely controlled by fear. They can begin to decide whether to continue avoiding the connection or to move toward it despite uncertainty. And within that decision lies the true turning point in their emotional journey. The unconscious mind has a strong influence over human decisions, often guiding actions in ways the conscious self does not fully recognize or understand. What a person considers a rational choice is frequently shaped by deeper layers of the psyche, where memories, emotions, fears, and desires are stored beyond immediate awareness. These hidden forces do not remain passive. They actively take part in shaping perception, influencing reactions, and directing behavior toward outcomes that may seem confusing on the surface. A person may consciously choose to distance themselves from someone, believing it is the logical or necessary step. They may justify this decision with reasons that appear valid: timing, circumstances, or personal priorities. Yet beneath these explanations, the unconscious may be working with an entirely different purpose. It may be trying to protect the individual from vulnerability, emotional exposure, or from reopening old wounds that have not fully healed. In this way, the unconscious does not directly oppose the conscious mind. Instead, it subtly redirects it, shaping decisions while maintaining the illusion of full control. This influence becomes especially clear in recurring behavior patterns. When someone repeatedly finds themselves drawn to similar situations or making the same kinds of choices, it is rarely accidental. The unconscious mind tends to seek familiarity, even when that familiarity is linked to discomfort or unresolved pain. It gravitates toward what it already knows, recreating experiences that mirror inner conflicts that have not yet been resolved. In doing so, it creates opportunities for the individual to confront these conflicts, although these opportunities are often mistaken for coincidence or simple circumstance. In relationships, the influence of the unconscious becomes even more significant. A person may feel an intense connection with someone without fully understanding why. They may sense a depth that goes beyond surface-level attraction, as if something within them recognizes the other on a much deeper level. This recognition often comes from the unconscious, where personal experiences, emotional imprints, and unacknowledged needs come together. The connection feels meaningful because it resonates with parts of the self that have not yet been consciously explored. At the same time, the unconscious can also create resistance. Just as it can draw a person towards certain connections, it can also push them away when those connections begin to reveal something they are not ready to face. This creates a paradox in which the individual both desires and avoids the same experience. They may feel pulled to move closer, only to withdraw when the intensity becomes too strong. This push and pull is not simply indecision, but a reflection of the unconscious trying to balance exposure with protection. As long as these underlying influences remain unexamined, the individual may continue to feel as though their life is being guided by forces outside their control. They may question their own choices, wondering why they act in ways that go against their conscious intentions. But the moment they begin to bring awareness to these hidden dynamics, something starts to change. The unconscious loses part of its power when it is observed, where patterns are recognized and understood. This awareness does not remove the influence of the unconscious, but it transforms the relationship with it. Instead of being unknowingly driven by hidden forces, the individual becomes an active participant in their own inner process. They begin to understand the links between past experiences and present behavior, between hidden fears and visible actions. And through this understanding, they gain the ability to respond differently, to make choices that are not only shaped by what lies beneath the surface, but also guided by awareness of it. Regret caused by avoidance and silence does not appear suddenly. It develops gradually, built from moments where truth was withheld and emotions were left unspoken. At the time, avoidance often feels like the safer option. It creates an illusion of control, allowing a person to step away from emotional intensity, delay confrontation, and protect themselves from outcomes they believe they may not be able to handle. In this sense, silence becomes a form of shield. It prevents vulnerability, keeps intentions concealed, and maintains a distance that feels manageable. However, what is avoided does not simply vanish. It remains beneath the surface, continuing to grow over time. When someone chooses silence over expression, They are not removing their emotions, they are only postponing them, the words that were never spoken, the actions that were never taken, and the truths that were never revealed begin to collect within the unconscious. These unexpressed elements are not neutral. They carry emotional weight, and over time that weight turns into something increasingly difficult to ignore. What once felt like protection slowly transforms into pressure, a constant awareness that something important has been left unresolved. Avoidance can also distort perception. A person may convince themselves that what they feel is not important enough to express, or that the situation will resolve on its own without their involvement. They may even believe that silence represents strength, a way to preserve dignity or avoid unnecessary complications. But beneath these justifications lies a deeper reality. They are, in fact, afraid of the consequences that truth may bring. This fear can be so subtle that it often goes unnoticed, shaping decisions without ever being fully recognized. As time passes, the consequences of avoidance begin to surface. Opportunities that once existed start to fade, connections weaken or are completely lost, and the chance to express what was once within reach becomes more and more distant. It is in these moments that regret begins to form, not as an immediate realization, but as a quiet understanding that something meaningful has been left unfinished. The mind begins to revisit the past, replaying situations where a different decision could have been made, where honesty could have replaced silence, and where courage could have replaced hesitation. Regret is not only about what happened, it is deeply connected to what did not happen. It is the awareness of potential that was never fulfilled, emotions that were never expressed, and paths that were never taken. This is what makes it so powerful, as it cannot be resolved by altering the past. Instead, it remains as a lingering presence, a reminder of the gap between what was lived and what could have been. Over time, the individual may come to realize that their silence was not passive, but active, that by choosing not to speak, they allowed situations to unfold in ways that did not reflect their true feelings. This realization can be difficult to accept, as it challenges the belief that inaction carries no responsibility. In truth, avoidance is a choice, and like all choices, it carries consequences. Yet within regret, there is also awareness. It pushes a person to confront their own patterns, to recognize the role fear played in their decisions, and to understand the cost of not expressing what was real. It also shows that honesty, even when it feels uncomfortable, holds a value that silence cannot replace. As this understanding deepens, it begins to reshape how the individual responds in similar situations in the future, making it harder to ignore what they once left unspoken. The power of realization and emotional awakening does not arrive as a loud or dramatic event. Instead, it often begins quietly, almost unnoticed, as a subtle shift in awareness. A person who once moved through life on autopilot, guided by habit and unconscious patterns, suddenly starts to see things differently. What was once ignored becomes difficult to overlook. Thoughts that were pushed aside begin to return with clarity, and emotions that were buried start to rise to the surface with renewed intensity. This is not coincidence, but a natural unfolding of the psyche as it moves toward greater awareness. Realization is not only about intellectual understanding, it is about experiencing the truth on a deeper level. It is the moment when a person no longer just thinks about what they have done or avoided, but truly sees and feels the impact of those choices. This experience can be both enlightening and unsettling. Enlightening because it brings clarity where confusion once existed, and unsettling because it removes the comfort of denial and forces the individual to face what they may have long avoided. Emotional awakening often follows this realization, and it can feel overwhelming. Emotions that were once distant or muted become clear and undeniable. A person may find themselves revisiting memories with a new perspective, recognizing meanings and feelings they did not fully understand at the time. Moments that once appeared insignificant begin to carry new importance, and connections that were taken for granted start to reveal their true depth. This awakening is not about forming new emotions, but about uncovering what was already present, waiting to be acknowledged. During this process, the individual may experience inner conflict. Part of them may want to embrace this new awareness, to explore it and understand it more fully. Another part may resist, preferring the simplicity of not knowing and remaining within familiar patterns that once felt safe. This tension is a natural part of personal growth. Emotional awakening means stepping into uncertainty, leaving behind the comfort of old defenses and facing reality without filters. As realization deepens, it begins to change the way a person perceives not only themselves, but also others. They may start to notice how their actions have affected those around them, seeing more clearly where they held back, where they misunderstood situations, or where fear influenced their behavior. This recognition is not always easy, but it is important. It opens the door to genuine understanding, not only of others, but also of one's own inner motives and behavioral patterns. Emotional awakening also brings a stronger sense of authenticity. The individual becomes less willing to ignore their true feelings or to act in ways that go against their inner experience. What once felt acceptable, silence, avoidance, and emotional distance, begins to feel incomplete or even dishonest. There is a growing need to align actions with inner truth, to express what is felt instead of hiding it behind layers of defense. This shift does not necessarily bring immediate changes in external circumstances, but it does transform the internal state. The person is no longer disconnected from their emotional reality. They become more aware of what they feel, why they feel it, and what it means. Within that awareness comes a new sense of possibility, the possibility of acting differently, of choosing honesty over avoidance, and of engaging with life in a way that reflects a deeper understanding of both themselves and their relationships. The meaning of true connection and destiny is often misunderstood, reduced to surface-level attraction or temporary emotional experiences. However, a genuine connection goes far beyond what is immediately visible. It operates at a deeper level of the psyche, where recognition occurs without explanation. When two individuals share such a bond, there is often an unspoken understanding. A sense that their meeting is not entirely random or accidental, but part of a larger pattern unfolding in their lives. This feeling does not come from fantasy, but from the alignment of inner worlds, experiences, emotions, and unconscious elements that resonate with one another in ways that are difficult to express. True connection challenges the individual. It does not only provide comfort or validation, it confronts them with aspects of themselves they may have long ignored. In the presence of such a bond, defenses begin to weaken, and the carefully constructed identity a person presents to the world starts to shift. This is because a meaningful connection acts as a mirror, reflecting both the light and the shadow within. It reveals strengths, but it also exposes fears, insecurities, and unresolved inner conflicts. For many, this can feel overwhelming, leading them to question the connection instead of recognizing its deeper meaning. Destiny, in this context, is not a fixed path that unfolds without effort or choice. It is not something that guarantees results or ensures permanence. Rather, it represents the potential for certain encounters to carry deeper meaning, acting as catalysts for growth and transformation. When a person meets someone who profoundly impacts them, it often signals an opportunity, an invitation to evolve, to understand themselves more fully, and to engage with life on a deeper level. Whether that opportunity is embraced depends entirely on the decisions that follow. A true connection often persists, even when circumstances create distance or separation. It is not easily erased by time or external change because its roots extend beyond immediate experience. The individual may attempt to move forward and focus on other areas of life, yet the connection remains present in subtle ways. It may appear in moments of reflection, in dreams, or in an unexplainable sense of familiarity that cannot be replaced. This persistence is not a sign of inability to let go, but rather an indication that the connection has touched something fundamental within the psyche. At the same time, it is important to understand that not all connections are meant to follow a simple or continuous path. Some exist to awaken, to disrupt, and to reveal truths that would otherwise remain hidden. They may not fit conventional expectations, and they may not lead to the outcomes one initially desires. Yet their significance lies in what they uncover, in how they shape a person's understanding of themselves and their capacity to feel, relate, and grow. To experience a true connection is to step into a space where certainty is replaced by depth. It requires openness, the willingness to be seen, and the courage to face what arises within. It is not always comfortable, and it does not always provide clear answers. But it carries a meaning that extends beyond temporary emotion, touching something lasting within the human experience. In that depth, the individual begins to realize that what they have encountered is not merely a passing moment, but something with the power to redefine how they understand connection, purpose, and the unfolding path of their own life.